Okay. As we spend our time together this evening, I have one goal every time I meet with parents, and that is that I really want parents to go away with smiles on their faces. Okay? That is the big goal. Raising children, as you all know, you're obviously in the process of that, is a daunting task, and there's a lot involved in raising kids, and then enter other unforeseen difficulties, and things become scary. So as we go tonight, there's a thing called, in presentations, sit and get. I don't like sit and get at all. I don't like just talking at you. I really like interaction with people. And so one thing I really want you all to do for me this evening, as we move forward, when you have a question, I want you to ask your question, okay? You don't need to wait till we're done to ask a question. This is about you all, and this is about your kids, and this is about solving problems, and this isn't about me just talking, okay? So when you have questions, ask them immediately. Do not wait to the end, okay? Is that a deal? We all good? Okay, very good. So I like interaction. So I'd like a couple of volunteers. I want somebody to tell me specifically your experience and why you're here tonight. Is there anybody that would like to do that? Your experience and why you're here tonight specifically. Yes.
So my first two kids, I have five daughters. My first two they read by the time they were in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
No problem first grade, no problem second grade. My third daughter, granted this is when COVID happened, in kindergarten, so we moved her home, and I work full-time, her dad works full-time. So she's a little bit behind then, and then still, things aren't clicking.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am.
Okay. Could everybody hear that? Okay, so here's the deal. We have 5 children. The first 2 learn to read just like that, just at the drop of a hat, okay? And we come to a third child and begin reading instruction, and things just are not clicking. Does that experience ring true for anybody else? Okay, all right, okay. What we've just heard is a very brief description of dyslexia, okay? Dyslexic children, non-dyslexic children. A non-dyslexic child will probably not remember learning to read. Okay? I am not a dyslexic person. I have no memory whatsoever of learning to read. Okay, here's my memory. I remember kindergarten. I remember first grade. My kindergarten was Mrs. Heath. That was my kindergarten teacher. First grade teacher, Mrs. Miller. Second grade teacher, Mrs. Lucia. Okay? I remember the green alphabet strip along the top of the wall. That's all that I remember. At some point in time, I was in our family room, and we had this curved couch that kind of sat in the corner, and there was room behind it. And I was there reading a book. I do not know how I got to that point in my life. I can't tell you. A dyslexic child, a dyslexic person, will never forget learning to read, because it was a daunting task. And probably at this stage of life, you're probably still not a great reader. And it's probably still not your favorite thing in the world to do. Given a choice of different activities, reading is not going to be at the top of the list. Okay? So right here, there's a significant difference between a dyslexic child and a non-dyslexic child. Can somebody tell me what dyslexia is? And I'm going to back up just a moment. Dyslexia is not something to be afraid of. Okay? And when you go away from here tonight, if you have a dyslexic child, you're going to go home with a smile on your face. Okay? Dyslexia is not something to fear. We are going to know what dyslexia is when we walk out of here tonight. Okay? What is dyslexia? Yes?
The brain is wired differently where they see things, the letters and words differently, the way they receive the message.
Okay.
So it's a different way of communication from the brain.
A different type of processing. Okay? All right, so a different way of processing. Okay? A different way of the brain functioning. Where does that begin? Okay? Where does this different functioning of the brain, this different thought process start? It starts with brain structure. okay? We're going to learn what dyslexia is. And it's actually a wonderful thing, okay? Brain structure. As human beings, we have two hemispheres to our brain. We have a left hemisphere, we have a right hemisphere, okay? I am, again, not a dyslexic person. Typical brain structure for a person who is not dyslexic. The left hemisphere of my brain is 10% larger than the right hemisphere of my brain. That's typical if you're not a dyslexic person. 10% more brain mass left side than the right side. Dyslexic person, their brain structure, this is where the good news begins, okay? A dyslexic person has 10% more brain mass in the right hemisphere of their brain than I do, making their left and right hemispheres overall equal in brain mass. So a dyslexic's brain is equal left and right. Mine is imbalanced. And that's where dyslexia begins, okay? Can somebody tell me what the word dyslexia means? Dyslexia is two Greek words. First word is dys, and dys just simply means trouble with. Lexia means language. So if we say that a person is dyslexic, all that we're saying is we have a person who struggles with language, a person that has difficulty with language. That's all that we're saying, okay? And so I think that what we can do is the way our society is structured, we love putting names on things. We just love doing that. Yes?
So does that mean they have problems learning a second language?
That's a great question, okay? And I'll answer that right now. Will a dyslexic person have difficulties learning another language? Possibly, possibly not, and I'll tell you why, okay? So we're going to jump way ahead here. We're going to get right to why dyslexics struggle with the English language. Okay, so here we have a dyslexic person. They have difficulty with language. Okay? Why do they struggle with the English language? Why do dyslexic kids struggle with English language? Non-dyslexic kids don't seem to struggle with the English language. Okay? Why is that happening? When we learn something, there must be 5 things that are true in order to become a master of what you're learning. 5 things have to happen. The very first thing that has to happen is the person must want to learn it. There has to be desire. If there's not desire, it's the old adage, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Okay? They have to want to do it. Second thing that has to be true is we have to have an instructor. Something or somebody has to teach us. The third thing that has to happen, there must be consistency. I go to my piano lesson every Monday, whatever. There has to be consistency. The fourth thing that must happen in order for me to master something is my instruction must be logical and sequential. What I am teaching or what I am being taught must make sense. And I am answering your question, believe it or not. What I am teaching must make sense. And it must happen in a sequential way. Mathematics makes sense. Mathematics is logical. But if I don't teach mathematics sequentially, it's not going to be mastered. If I start with algebra, game over. We are not going to be successful. When we teach mathematics, we have to start with 1 + 1. And then we work our way up the ladder, building all sorts of steps along the way until we get to algebra, so that when we get to algebra, all of these other components are in place so that now I am able to learn algebra. So things must happen sequentially. The last thing that has to happen is there must be excellent practice. Okay? So I'm going to become a pianist. I want to do this. Maybe, maybe not. Lots of kids say they want to. I want to learn this instrument, Mom. I want to learn this instrument, Dad. Okay? We get an instructor. We go every Monday at whatever time or every Tuesday or whatever day it is. We're consistent there. Our instructor is excellent. They're teaching us logically and sequentially. They start with, this is a piano. We have white keys. We have black keys. We have these things called notes and octaves, and we start at the very basics, and we begin building, okay? And then it must be followed with excellent practice. I can have the best piano teacher in the world, but if I go home and I don't want to practice, and Mom has to nag me, have you practiced the piano today yet, Rick? No, I want to go out and play. You have to practice the piano first, 30 minutes. So I go in there, I'm done, and I run out the door to play with my friends. I will never be an excellent pianist. What is happening? We're doing what we've done from the day that we were born. We're building neural pathways, okay? There's nothing in life that we do where we do not need to build neural pathways. Nothing. When we're born, we're really blank slates, completely blank slates. And again, ask questions along the way here. As a little guy or a little girl, we're laying there on the floor in the living room, and something catches our attention behind us. And what do? We turn our head to look at it. And after a while, we begin to crane our shoulder. And then we begin to twist our torso. And we do this over and over and over until we do what? Finally, we learn how to roll over. Okay, we have to do that over and over and over again. Our brain is learning. We're building neural pathways, and it's how do all these muscles function together to achieve this end goal. All right? Learning a different language. How can that be difficult? We're going to go to the fourth piece of the puzzle, the logical sequential piece of the puzzle. Number 4. Dyslexic people must build what non-dyslexic people are born with. And here's something very interesting. If y'all go out there to the dyslexic world today and you say that Rick Weaver said this tonight, they're going to probably hang me in the morning, okay? But I believe that the dyslexic person is actually the normal learner. Because there's nothing in life that we do not have to build neural pathways in order to perform. Nothing. Simply rolling over on the ground, I have to build neural pathways to do that. You have a neuron and a neuron, and they have synapses at the end, and as my brain begins to learn, we make a connection in our brain. And that connection is made. That's called a neural pathway, a synaptic connection. And the more we do something the same way, excellently over and over and over again, the stronger that connection becomes. That is normal in everything we do in life. Let's jump forward just a few months. How about sitting up? You have to learn to do it. How about holding a spoon? You have to learn to do it. How about getting it in your mouth? You have to learn to do it. Everything in life is true for this process. Everything. Now we come to language. And we want to teach our children language. We want to teach them English. We want to teach them Spanish. We want to teach them something, okay? Do dyslexic students struggle as much with Spanish or French or English as they do English? It depends on the language. Why is that? Goes to the fourth piece of the puzzle, logical sequential presentation. The English language is not logical or sequential. It's not. Okay, and you all have experienced it, and you all can probably give examples. Something you got to watch online. Lucille Ball and Ricky Arnaz, is that his name? They have this little thing, and it's a little piece from one of their shows back in the 50s or whatever years those were. I can't remember the name though. No, and so Lucy is going to teach Ricky how to read, and Ricky is reading this book about a lumberjack. We'll use the term lumberjack. He works out in the forest, and it's teaching us the silliness of the English language. It's about OUGH, about boughs on trees and walking through things, and he developed a cough, and it's over and over and over again. All of these different pronunciations for OUGH. Okay? A logical sequential language is what we call a phonetic language. You have to laugh when they talk about English and hooked on phonics. That's funny. English is not a phonetic language. English has 26 symbols with 44 phonemes. That's not logical. That doesn't make sense. But it gets a lot worse than that. Those 44 phonemes can be spelled 138 ways at least. So we have 44 sounds with 138 spellings and probably more. That's not logical. Spanish is a phonetic language. Spanish, if you hear something, there's one way to spell it. That's logical. That makes sense. Okay? So for a dyslexic person who has to build a neural pathway in order to master this thing, which is a normal learning process, when they're presented with Spanish and English, Spanish is a much easier language to learn. Okay? Now, if you're an American English speaker, and English is your primary language, and that's what you've spoken all along, it'll probably be hard for you to pick up Spanish if you're dyslexic. You've not had a good experience with language. But language to language, dyslexia is an easier language. Spanish is a much easier language to learn because it's logical. It makes sense. And with a dyslexic child, we're having to do something that the non-dyslexic child doesn't have to do. We have to build the ability to read. Non-dyslexic children, you hear about them all the time. 3 years old, 4 years old, oh, they taught themselves to read. They were sitting in my lap, and I read to them, and they just kind of took off. And I thought they were memorizing it, but they were reading other stuff too. That's not unusual for a non-dyslexic kid. Not at all unusual. Non-dyslexic kids, non-dyslexic adults do not remember learning to read. Why is that? Can somebody tell me what is the most difficult thing you've ever learned in your life? Anybody? Chemistry. Do you remember the class? Yeah. Do you remember the studying? The preparation? The sweating when the tests were coming? You'll never forget that. Do you remember learning to read? There's a difference. And we can all point to things like that in our life. If you're a dyslexic adult, you probably remember learning to read. You probably remember real challenges with it. You probably remember feeling stupid. You probably remember hoping they don't call your name to read in class. You probably remember coming around the circle as everybody's taking a paragraph, counting the paragraphs, which one am I going to be reading, and practicing it. You probably remember all of those things. And you probably remember a lot more than that. Okay? You're not a stupid person. You're being taught a language that is neither logical nor sequential, and you're having to build neural pathways in order to achieve it. But you know, here's the really crazy thing. We've been learning about dyslexia in America since roughly 1990 in earnest. We were learning about it before that, but in earnest, 1990-ish. In 1990, so did that answer your question? In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. Okay, the Americans with Disabilities Act is an access act. What it says is that if there is a publicly funded program, if the federal government or state government or city government is paying for something, they must provide equal access to that program to all American citizens. And so that's why we have wheelchair ramps in public buildings now. We didn't used to have those. That's a result of the ADA. Okay? Well, Congress went to the National Institute of Health after that ADA was passed. First off, I'll tell you, I don't believe that dyslexia is a disability. And I will also be shot at dawn if anybody tells anybody else that. Okay? Congress went to the National Institute of Health, and they said, we believe that there's a large percentage of the student population not receiving equal access to the educational system because of some difficulties with learning. 1990-ish, Congress asked the National Institute of Health, would you conduct a study on this? Would you do that? National Institute of Health said, yes, we would. So they said, this is going to be a really big study. So they went out and they solicited about 30 major universities around the country. The universities are going to conduct the study. The National Institute of Health is going to coordinate the study. Okay? This study focused on dyslexia. That study continues today. 30 major universities. University of Colorado participates in it. University of Texas participates in it. University of Washington, University of California, Johns Hopkins, Georgetown, Yale. Significant universities all over the country are participating in this study. And here's basically how the study functions. That 5 universities must independently arrive at the same findings on dyslexia. And if that happens, those findings will be published. If that does not happen, those findings are not published. Okay? There was a gentleman by the name of Reed Lyon who chaired the Children's Division of the National Institute of Health back in 1990. He was the one responsible for saying, yes, we'll do this study. We heard Reed Lyon speak probably about 10 years ago. Reed Lyon said that you can take a non-dyslexic child and you can take any English curriculum you want. Take a big hat, take little pieces of paper with names of different curriculums, hundreds of curriculums, drop them all in the hat, pick one out, teach your kid using that curriculum, and they'll be successful. Why is that? Why can you use any curriculum you want and the kid's going to be successful? It's because they're basically pre-wired for the process. And that's why it's super simple for them to pick up. You don't have to build anything. Building things is tough. Being born with it is not. Now I'm going to say something really crazy tonight. About 83% of our population is not dyslexic. So out of about every 100 people, you have 80 to 83 people who are not dyslexic. About 17 to 20 are. Okay? Those 80% probably have no memory of learning to read. The dyslexic kids, we use the same curriculum to teach them with not very good results. We use the same curriculum with not very good results. Yes?
Is dyslexia like a spectrum, like where like some people have a harder time with it and other people have like a lower form?
Great question. That's a very good question. So is dyslexia a spectrum? Are there those who have more struggle and those who have less struggle? Okay. And I'll just say the word spectrum is fine, but I'll just say I don't like using that word, okay, only because then we get an association with autism, which is completely different, okay? So when I talk about dyslexia, we talk about a continuum, okay? So yes, there is a continuum from those who are mildly dyslexic to those who are profoundly dyslexic, okay? So we can go mild, moderate, severe, profound. That's where we go with dyslexia as far as our continuum is concerned. If you are mildly dyslexic, you may not know that you are, okay? You might have had a couple of odd things in your life growing up, all right? A couple of odd little memories, but you got on with life and things happened and you're fine, okay? Once you move into moderate dyslexia, that's no longer true. When you move into moderate dyslexia, things aren't going properly, okay? And it goes back to this whole issue that we've been talking about with language and how we teach it, okay? If you're dyslexic and you're born in an English-speaking country, you got a very tall order in front of you. A very tall order, okay? Here's the really, 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 really crazy thing. All of these universities, 30 universities, that have significant research programs on dyslexia. This is the craziest thing in the world. All of those universities also have teacher certification programs. All of those universities, go to the University of Colorado. They are conducting research on dyslexia. They're also graduating teachers every single year. And here is the craziest thing in the world. Talk to a teacher that graduates from the University of Colorado about dyslexia, and they'll probably know little to nothing about it. and yet they graduated from a school where the research is being done. And that's why as parents, we can be in the school system, our children can be in the school system, and our teachers don't know what they're looking at. And you know what our teachers do? And this is not knocking teachers. You can only help if you know what's happening. You can only help if you've been taught, okay? But teachers will say so often, our kids in kindergarten, and our kids go off, and you know what? They jump on the big yellow bus, or we drop them off, or whatever the case is, and they've got their little lunchbox. It's the first day of school, the first little guy's day of school, the little girl's day of school, and we all have high expectations. Our little guy or little girl goes through the door, and we think, woo, okay, this is so exciting. And what is the first thing that we begin to teach kids? What's the very first thing? Letters, language, reading and writing is the very, very first thing we start to teach kids. And what happens to our kid? Our kid is struggling right out of the gate. And it's like we're scratching our head going, what in the world's going on? But you know what? It's sad, but quite often teachers say, well, they're going to be fine. Oh, they're going to be fine. Yes, there's rough edges, but they're going to be fine. And they say that in kindergarten. And then we hear it again in first grade. And then we hear it again in second grade. And the sad thing is, we graduate thousands of kids every year who can't read. Millions of kids probably, yes.
Mine's more a comment on that, but my son, same thing, he was in kindergarten. I started to notice that he was struggling.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, I was like, is it because we speak Spanish at home
Mm-hmm.
and at school he's learning English? And then first grade comes and it was the same thing. And then in second grade, he had a teacher who, her husband, her son and daughter were dyslexic. And
Mm-hmm.
she's the one that
Mm-hmm.
brought it up. And that's when we started the whole process. And it was in third grade when he finally was officially diagnosed.
Right.
with
Okay.
dyslexia.
Did you all hear that? Okay, so very much this story, okay? Very much this story. And it's not so much that you speak Spanish in your home.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a fantastic thing, actually. If you're Spanish, you should speak Spanish in your home. Because having a kid who can speak 2 languages is a fantastic thing. It's absolutely a fantastic thing. All right? But children, take an English-speaking child, 2 or 3 years old, to a foreign country, they pick up Spanish that fast. Even though English is the primary language in the home. It's because kids, their brains are so malleable. They're so plastic. Okay? 7 and 8 years old, we as parents, our flags start to go up, right? And the teachers reassure us that everything's fine. Okay? Everything is not fine. Everything is not fine. There's nothing wrong with the kid. It's how we're teaching the kid. And I heard it once said that the problem with dyslexia is not the dyslexic child. The problem with dyslexia is the adults in the dyslexic child's life. That we don't know what we're looking at. We don't know how to help. Okay? And what we do is, it's a pattern that's as old as the educational system. Yes?
So, like, kids that have dyslexia, do they struggle a lot with writing too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do kids with dyslexia struggle a lot with writing? They do. In fact, writing is their greatest struggle. Okay? So dyslexia is, among other things, a language processing struggle. Okay, so we have reading, writing, speaking, and spelling. Okay? Dyslexia may or may not impact speaking. It's not unusual for a dyslexic person to have some struggles with language. That's not an unusual thing. Okay? But it will impact reading, writing, and spelling. The most challenging is writing. Because with writing, we go from nothing to we have to have an idea, and we have to put it on paper with lots and lots and lots of words. Okay? So we're creating. That is the most challenging. Spelling is secondary because it's writing, but it's a lot less of it. Okay? It's one word, one word, one word. And then reading will be the easiest, though that doesn't mean that reading is going to be easy. That doesn't mean that. But with reading, everything exists. there's only one task, and that's decoding. Okay? And so yes, writing is probably the dyslexic's greatest struggle. And then if we throw dysgraphia into the mix, which is difficulty with actual handwriting, then it really becomes a big deal. Okay? So yes, good question. Yes?
So you mentioned we don't know what we're looking at. What might be some of the things that aren't normal? Everything is not fine. This isn't how it should be. Maybe like some of the signs are more.
Yep, okay, good. All right, so you all have a handout, okay? All right, and we'll just talk about that for a minute. So dyslexia, yes. So dyslexia, and so we'll kind of come in the back door here just a little bit. Dyslexia, if you're wanting to be diagnosed for dyslexia, it is not a medical diagnosis. So you cannot go to your pediatrician and be diagnosed for dyslexia. Okay? You can't get it, you can't take an x-ray and say, yes, dyslexia. You can't draw blood and send it off to the lab and say, yes, dyslexia. We see that under the microscope. You can't do a nasal swab or a throat swab and say, yes, dyslexia. You can't do that. Okay? This is a brain structure. It begins with a neurological difference is where dyslexia begins. Okay? Dyslexia is what we call a clinical diagnosis. And that is basically that dyslexia has a fingerprint. Okay? It's very unique. A dyslexic person is going to do certain things differently than a non-dyslexic person. Something that you all need to know, that dyslexic people are on average more intelligent than their peers. Okay? Dyslexics are on average more intelligent than their peers. Dyslexic people are better problem solvers than their peers. Dyslexic people are better innovators than their peers. Hands down, far and away, across the board. Problem solvers, innovators. They are intelligent people who are mistaken for being unintelligent because of difficulties with the English language. All right? And this goes back to this whole thing with teachers and not recognizing it, and we'll come back to that, okay? We'll come back to this whole idea, this whole thought of not recognizing it in the schools. Okay, so dyslexia has this fingerprint. And I simplify things, but I've got a little formula, and my formula is called 3 + 3 = dyslexia. Okay? 3 + 3 = dyslexia. That's kind of a weird thought. Dyslexia is going to impact 4 areas of a person's life. Okay, so things are going to happen differently in 4 areas of a dyslexic person's life. The first area is language, reading, writing, speaking, spelling. Okay, we're going to see problems there. We're going to see specifics, and we'll leave it generally right now. Difficulties with language. Second area where we will see differences in the way a dyslexic person lives life is in difficulties with rote, random memorization. Having to memorize things that are random in nature. Okay? Third area, where a dyslexic person will encounter different struggles in life, is directionality. For years and years and years, you'd hear people say, well, a dyslexic person sees things differently. They see B's as D's. They see things backwards. And no, they don't. They don't see anything differently. Okay? They have a directionality confusion. A dyslexic person can very commonly not remember left and right. Very, very common. Okay? This is not an issue of intelligence at all. A dyslexic person can't remember with a B and a D. I can't remember, does the circle go on this side or this side? They're right half of the time because it's almost always a guess. All right? So why do they struggle with this directionality problem? This is just kind of interesting. At this point in time, this is hypothesis, okay? It's something that is believed as a possibility. This has not been proved why this is true. Dyslexic people can struggle with cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. A dyslexic person can struggle getting from point A to point B in their town. Directions, okay? They can struggle with this. Why is that? Hypothesis, possibility. Researchers look at the brain. We have a left and right side of the brain, okay? And again, dyslexic people, both hemispheres are roughly equal in overall brain mass. Well, if I took 2 baseballs and I gave you 2 baseballs, here's a baseball in each hand, left and right hand, okay? And inside of one of those baseballs, we put a little weight right in the center of the ball to make them unequal in weight. Those baseballs must be 7% difference in weight before our brain can detect it. So until we get to 7% difference, we're going to think that they're the same weight. We reach 7%, and now our brain can begin to say, heavier, okay? There's some thought that possibly that this is what is happening with a dyslexic's brain. Equal brain mass, both sides, left and right, okay? Hypothesis, we don't know for sure why that's happening, but that is a third area where a dyslexic person can struggle, okay? Fourth area is difficulty with things that have to do with sequence. If sequence is important, if things must happen in a certain order in order to be successful, that's something that a dyslexic person can struggle with. Examples of that. My 10-year-old just can't tie his shoes. He just can't get it down, you know? Why is that? This is not an issue of intelligence. This is an issue of sequence. To tie my shoes, we have 5 or 6 steps that are necessary, and they must happen in order. And if they don't happen in that order, we're not going to be successful. Long division. Long division has sequence. It must happen in a certain sequence over and over and over again. If it does not happen, we're going to struggle. That's the fourth area where a dyslexic person can struggle, okay, is difficulties with sequence. Somebody help me. What was the question?
What are the signs?
The signs, thank you. They happen in those 4 areas, okay? Difficulties with language processing, difficulties with language processing, difficulties with rote random memorization. Okay, so that's memorizing anything that has random order. Difficulties with directionality, difficulties with sequence. Yes?
I'm just curious, I mean, I've heard a lot of strengths that dyslexic have a lot of strengths. I wonder if you could mention a few symptoms of someone with dyslexia. What are their strengths that if you're thinking they kind of struggle in these areas, but they're really good at these things, would that be an indicator?
Yes. Yeah, oh, you see, I mean, if you've got dyslexic children, you've heard them talk about the craziest things. I mean, big ideas for little kids. And you go, that's coming out of my child? And you know, talking to them, there again, it is such a sad thing because a dyslexic kid, especially in the school system, will begin to think that they're stupid unless they know what's happening. Ignorance is not bliss, okay? These kids are brilliant kids. They're brilliant adults, all right? And there's this disconnect. This is the number one warning sign for dyslexia. When we've got a kid and you had no red flag that they were going to struggle in school. There was nothing in your mind that said that this kid's going to struggle when they would send them off to the big brick building. They're going to do great just like every other kid, and then they come home struggling. We're going, where is this coming from? That's the first warning sign for dyslexia. A bright child who struggles with language. Number one warning sign, okay? You can see the strengths develop as they move through life, but again, I was just talking to a little boy at my desk just yesterday, and this little guy is talking about the properties of light. This little guy's like 7, and he's talking about the rainbow and the ultraviolet light spectrum, and he's speculating about under what circumstances we could see ultraviolet light, and I'm going, you're 7, you shouldn't be thinking about this stuff. but it's like, but they're intelligent kids, and they're inquisitive, and they're question askers. Okay, yes?
Are you aware of being wrongly diagnosed? What are some of the other diagnoses that a child is given when they are suffering from dyslexia, but they're not being seen by
Kids,
the proper person?
big answer to that is kids are very, very seldom diagnosed, very seldom. Okay? Very few people are ever diagnosed for dyslexia. I mean, it is minutia, so few that are actually diagnosed for dyslexia. Okay? This is such a big story. I mean, this story just goes and goes and goes. And you don't need a diagnosis for dyslexia. You need to know that right now. You don't need one. Okay? I mean, and I can tell you how to diagnose your kid right now. Okay? But I can't legally call it a diagnosis. Let's be clear on that. To legally diagnose, you have to be an educational psychologist to legally diagnose. We've been doing this for 22 years, and we know dyslexia when we see it, but we can't call it a diagnosis, okay? So quite often, one place where we do see problems with that is quite often it's attributed to difficulties with the eyes, very, very commonly. And so we'll take our kid to the eye doctor and we'll say that they've got a tracking problem. Doesn't mean that they don't have a tracking problem, but quite oftentimes they just say, this is the problem, this is your child's problem, and if we solve the tracking problem, we're going to solve the problem. No, that does not solve the problem. They might have a tracking problem and they may need help with that, but we see that all the time, where that's thought to be the ultimate solution, is solving this tracking problem with the eyes, okay? Yeah, so we're kind of getting a little bit scattered here now, which I apologize for that. But again, the warning signs, let's just kind of button this down, okay? There's 3 primary warning signs, and there's a host of secondary warning signs, okay? And you're going to see a bunch of them on the paper right there on this warning signs list in front of you. But for a person, and again, this is a very basic approach, but for a person to be dyslexic, they must have the 3 primary warning signs. You have to have them. Not optional, you have to have them, okay? Now, you can have these 3 primary warning signs and not be dyslexic, but to be dyslexic, you have to have them, okay? And they are, and we're going to be coming off of this list. Number 1, you must have an intelligent child, and I don't mean they don't have to be a rocket scientist, but they must be of at least average intelligence and struggle with language. Because that is the number 1 flag that should run up, the red flag that should run up the pole, is why is my intelligent kid struggling with the English language? Because that doesn't happen unless we're dealing with dyslexia. It just doesn't happen. Now, if a kid has just never been exposed to language, and they've never been exposed to a book and to reading, and they've never had any instruction whatsoever, then there's probably going to be struggles, okay? But for an intelligent little boy or little girl to be exposed to the English language and struggle, we should immediately say, wow, this is big. This is really big. We need to pay attention to this immediately. When we go to kindergarten, people say, you can't diagnose in kindergarten. Well, maybe not officially, but when you have a kindergarten who's struggling with language and they're a bright little boy or little girl, you immediately should be saying, we need to pay attention to this. We need to pay attention to this, okay? Number 2, specifically, this person must be a bad speller, okay? If this person is a good speller, it's not dyslexia. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, my kid passes their spelling test every week. You know, not necessarily fabulously, but we get a B or an A on our spelling test every single week, okay? How much did you study for it? Are you spending 3 and 4 and 5 times as much studying as everybody else to achieve that grade? That should be a warning sign. Yes?
I could give an example.
Yes.
If that's okay. So my son, he's 10 now, but in first grade they would have the spelling test every week on Friday. So starting since Monday, we would start practicing every night. The ones he would get wrong, I would have him write them 5 times. Write this one 5 times, and then he would. But with my help, and if I left him alone, I'd be like, okay, you write it, he wouldn't be able to do it. So coming Friday, when it's the spelling test, 0. None of them were correct. So we would do the memorizing. We would do the little blocks where he would choose the letters to put the words together. We did a box with, I think it was coffee grounds, where he would do it with his finger. We did the air writing, and he was still not get any of them on his spelling test. And they were doing 15, then they brought it down to 10, and then finally it was like, we're just not going to worry about a grade on the spelling.
Home run. That's exactly where we should be. Dyslexic kids should not take spelling tests. It's a waste of time. Yes?
So I have a question. I have a kid who has speech impediment and he struggles with language, but not with memory. So on those tests, they had the same teacher. He will get 100% because he can memorize about anything. But then next day, he doesn't know how to spell it.
Perfect. That's another, and those are our 2 examples. Those are both the examples that I was going to give, okay? And that is spelling for a dyslexic student, both of these. Number one example, tons and tons and tons of preparation, blood, sweat, and tears with no results. Okay? Second example, memorize, got them, but next week they're gone. Okay? Those are the two examples of spelling for the dyslexic student. This one looks like, oh, he can spell well, he gets great grades on the spelling test, but he doesn't retain them. Okay? That's dyslexia. The non-dyslexic kid will retain them, the lion's share of them. Okay? They might back off on a few of them, but the lion's share of them, the non-dyslexic kid's going to go away with. It's a terrible way right there, it's a terrible way to teach spelling. Terrible. Because all it is just memorizing. The English language has rules. And if you know the rules, you can spell most anything. But if you're going to memorize every word, do you know how many words are in the English language? 1.2 million. And so we're going to learn spelling by memorizing one word at a time? Are you kidding me? Okay, when are we going to get 10% of the way there? Never. Never. Okay? It's a terrible way to teach spelling. And if you have a dyslexic student who's struggling, you need to opt out of the test. And you have the right to do that. It is a waste of your time. Because you know what? You spend hours doing it with no return for your investment. That's not a wise use of your time. We had one back here first, and then I'll come to you.
I was just going to tell you that Elijah wrote down his dinner order for me tonight, and every word is misspelled. Lettuce being my favorite, L-E-D-E-S.
Mm-hmm.
He's 11.
Yeah. Perfect example of something else we look for in dyslexic spelling. They spell logically. See, we look, we say, no, Elijah, we're sorry. I can see what you were thinking, but you're wrong. You know, the English language is not a phonetic language. That's phonetic, L-E-T-I-S, lettuce. Okay, that's phonetic. That's the way language should work. That's the way Spanish does work. Okay? Not all of the time.
I am dyslexic, and I struggle with this because we have sounds that sounds like the edge, and for me it was a struggle.
Okay, so it shows what I know about the Spanish language, okay? So I was told it was 100% phonetic. But the more phonetic a language it is, that's what dyslexic people want to do. They want to spell phonetically, okay? Which makes sense, all right? The English language, we talked about it. Doesn't make sense. You had a question.
If there's no diagnosis for it really, then how do you determine which part of it's the continuum that they're on to know if they'll need extra help or not?
Okay, it's pretty easy. Pretty easy, okay? Well, first off, and nothing against schools, but schools are not going to step up to help your kid, okay? And I don't blame schools. I'm not saying that schools are horrible, but the reality is when you're a teacher, and let's just say you're an elementary teacher and you got 25 kids every day, and you're grading homework every night and on the weekends, and you're doing stuff after hours, you know what? It's hard for teachers to have the time now to give specific help to individual students, okay? So that's the whole thing with how do schools know how to help. Dyslexia, mild, moderate, severe, profound. If we have a bell curve, we have very few over here that are mild. We have very few over here that are profound. We come up on top of the bell curve, we have tons of dyslexic people that are moderately dyslexic. And as we spill over the top, we're going to have fewer that are severely dyslexic. They're going to be down here closer to, more down there in the range of the profound kids, not nearly as many of them. This is what it looks like. A mildly dyslexic person will probably have memory of some odd things in school. They might have gotten pulled out for a special reading class for a little while, but things seemed to click and they took off, okay? Or maybe they've got some left-right confusion, but generally life works real well for them. And really, you know what? They're doing fine. When you get into moderate dyslexia, you start having problems. But here's moderate dyslexia. It's enough to cause you problems, but not usually enough to get you help. That's moderate dyslexia, where people ask questions, where the teachers don't just say, yeah, it's obvious that this kid needs help, where there's debate and, well, you know, and it's kind of gray and not real good answers. That's moderate dyslexia. We're having problems, but it's not just overwhelmingly obvious, but Well, it's overwhelmingly obvious to us, but the school has enough, or a lack, I should say, the school lacks enough evidence that they don't just jump in and help the kid. That's where most dyslexics fall. They fall into this gray realm where they're not succeeding because they're struggling, but they're not bad enough to get great help. That's moderate dyslexia. When you move into severe or profound dyslexia, boom, you're hitting the wall, and you're like not going anywhere. Things are not happening. Okay, that's severe or profound dyslexia, and it's about that simple. Okay.
You have on here, it says letter number reversal continues past first grade. My daughter's in first grade, and she will read like if it says number 21, she'll read it like number 12,
Mm-hmm.
and like things like that. And what I want to help her with, is if she is dyslexic, but I don't know, because she does mix up quite a few things. Is this just a kid still learning? Can I do nothing to help her now, or like do I have to wait till
No, you don't wait.
first grade to see if
You don't wait. That's what the schools tell us to do. The schools keep telling us to wait. And that is a dangerous thing. Okay? It's not such a big deal if you're homeschooling your kid, right? But when you're in a formal school setting, it's a big deal because the schools don't wait on us. And the longer we wait to get help, the further behind our kids get, and the harder it is for them to catch up. Okay? And you see it in Dibble scores. Usually a dyslexic person in Dibble scores, there's usually a little improvement with every Dibble test. A little bit. But if you graph it, it kind of looks like this. Here's the dyslexic kid. You can see it improving. Here's the other kids. And you have this gap that is growing between where our kids are and where the rest of the kids are. And this gap continues to grow semester by semester. And so no, you don't wait. Okay, you don't want to wait.
Yeah, because I didn't know if since it says things past first grade, like, are there signs before, like, she goes into second grade, like, so that,
Second grade, second grade, that's where most people, if dyslexia is going to be caught, that's generally where it's caught. 7 to 8 years old. Because here's what's happening. Kindergarten, first, second grade, those are kind of learning to read years. For sure, kindergarten and first grade, but most kids are picking it up very rapidly, okay? Through those years, we're only taking on 300 new vocabulary words a year, and I don't mean that we're using vocabulary tests, but I mean the words that kids are seeing on paper, it's not growing rapidly, all right? And our kids, they have 4 compensatory, they have 4 skills when they read. 3 of them are compensatory, okay? 3 of them are compensatory. And those skills work okay through second grade-ish. Okay, so dyslexic people will do some real reading. It's not like a dyslexic person never reads at all. They do some real reading. But they use 3 other things. They use a lot of guessing. They use a lot of reading based on context. So a dyslexic person, they're bright. And you know what? They develop these workarounds without anybody teaching them. They're problem solvers. We already talked about that. Okay? They read based on context. So early on, it's the pictures. What are the pictures telling me? And then I look at the words. Then I look at the pictures. And then I look at the words. And pony becomes horse. Well, they both got hooves, son. But it's a horse. It's not a pony. But what they do, they read based on context. Okay? And they become very good at it. The third compensatory skill that a dyslexic uses is called visual memory. And that's where they take a picture of the word with their brain. They see a word, and they say, Mom, what does this word say? And they say that word says this, and they take a picture. And it goes on a 3x5 card in their brain. Okay? And when they see that word on paper, they go, future. Forgot the word. But they didn't read it. Okay? It was a picture, and they have that picture because somebody told them this is what the word means, and they take a picture of it. That's the 4th skill that dyslexics use for reading. Those skills work okay into second grade because the number of words that a kid is being exposed to is not growing rapidly. We hit 3rd grade, and kids begin 3rd grade, they start being exposed to between 2,000 and 5,000 new words a year on paper. And all of a sudden, those skills that they had developed are overwhelmed. And that's why it's in 2nd grade to 3rd grade where we see the overwhelming number of parents beginning to say, hey, hey, something's going on here. We knew something was going on back here, but now we really see it going on. It's becoming super obvious now, okay? And we won't go back into the school system. Okay, so that's happening between 2nd and 3rd grade, all right? And so diagnosis, most kids are never diagnosed. 40% of dyslexic kids drop out of school by their junior year, okay? And that's a travesty. But that is happening because they are not receiving help. And again, it's not slamming the schools. Schools are trying to help. They're trying to do that. But they don't know what dyslexia is. And even if they have some inkling that it is dyslexia, they don't know how to help. Most schools, when they start saying dyslexia, most kids get, if they get this far, maybe it's to a 504, maybe an IEP, maybe they end up in SPED. That's not where a dyslexic kid belongs. Because the curriculum that they use in SPED is called slower and louder. They teach the exact same way. And the teachers do. They slow down and they start talking louder, like that's going to make a difference. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't. Okay, again, it's not that dyslexic people don't grow in their abilities as the years go by, but they struggle. And that gap keeps getting wider and wider and wider. All right? So we can't count on diagnosis, but you know what? Tonight, you folks can diagnose your own kids. You can diagnose yourselves. Because if you know, we'll finish this whole idea on these warning signs. If you see this, let's just finish it. Do we have an intelligent person? It doesn't have to be a kid. It can be an adult. An intelligent individual who struggles with language. There's a reason for that. It's because my whole life I've tried to build neural pathways with something that's not logical. I've got a test for you all. Are you ready? Here's your test. What's 1 + 1? Okay, very good. Is that logical? Can you prove it all day long, every day? You can. Okay, you can take 2 apples, or you can take 2 pennies, or you can take 2 tables or 2 chairs. One here, one here. We put them together, we count them, we've got a new number. It's logical all day long. What if I told you that 1 + 1 also equaled 72? And it's true. This is true. I'm not joking with you. 1 + 1 equals 72. And 1 + 1 equals 213. And we're going to come up with 7 answers for 1 + 1. Okay? And every one of them are true. Which one would you have no problem remembering ever? The 2. Because you can prove it every day. It's logical and can be proven. You can't prove the other 7, the other 6. You just have to remember them. Okay, so now you're taking a test. And in the test, you're working through an algebra problem or a division problem, and you come to 1 + 1. What are you going to put?
2.
What about the other 6?
I memorized them.
How do you know which one of the 7 you use? How do you know?
Just remembered.
And that's what we do with language. When I pick up a book, and you're exactly right, that's exactly what happens for the non-dyslexic person. We're going to take the letter A now. We're going to take this math example and we're going to move it over into the world of language. The letter A. Take your little girl or your little boy and you say, I've got a circle here and it's got a line on the side of it and it has a name. Its name is A. Our kid's going to be okay with that because we can also draw a single line and we can say it has a name, it's 1. Our kids get that, okay? We can't have the kid that does 12 and 21, that happens, okay? But our kids get that. They can associate a symbol and a name for that symbol. They can do that. And we're going to say A talks. It likes to talk. And when it talks, it loves to say its name. It says A. A. And so whenever you see a circle with a line on the side of it, it likes to talk. What's it going to say? A. Very good. So so the kid opens up the book, and the first thing he sees is AT. 8. That says 8. No, it actually says at. But you told me that A says its name. Well, here it doesn't. Here it says Have we told them why? A dyslexic kid needs to know why. I'm not dyslexic. I didn't need to know why. Nobody ever needed to teach me that. I picked it up like that, and it was gone. I have no memory whatsoever of learning that. 1 + 1 = 2, but also equals 211. I don't know. Well, that was not the answer. It was 200 and something. I don't even remember what my answer was. Okay? A says A, but it also says One of them makes sense. One of them is logical. And one of them our kid can tuck away forever. But it also says and Well, I thought you said O said and that you said Well, they do, but so does A. Well, when? So I'm spelling and I hear Should I use an A? You said it was a U. Which one do I use? There's reasons why, but you know what we don't do? We don't teach our kids why. If we tell them why, they can remember. Does anybody know why A says
I was gonna say we don't know.
Can anybody tell me? Yeah, that's what we do. There's a reason why A says It's called a closed syllable. If you have a vowel followed by a consonant within the same syllable, the vowel will say its short sound. I followed by a T, what does it say? It. But if you take away the T, what does the I say? It says I. That's called an open syllable. If we have a vowel within a syllable that is not followed by a consonant, it will say its name. We don't tell kids that. Why don't we tell kids that? Because 80% of them get it like that. You don't even have to tell them. So we don't teach that way. We don't teach to the 20%, we teach to the 80%. The 20% need to be told why. Okay? So, but this math example, it gets worse. We're going to take that A. Okay, it says A. So every time, we could never say this to a kid, if you hear A, use an A. But there are 6 other ways to spell that sound. 1 + 1 = 2. There's 6 other answers. No, there's not. There's just one, which is logical. A says A, but there's 6 other ways to spell that. Can somebody tell me another way to spell A? AI. How about another way? EI. How about another? Okay, AY, EIGH. There's 7 ways to do it. We have a kid who spelled lettuce L-I-T-I-S. Who was that? Back there, L-E-T-I-S. Perfectly phonetic. Okay? All right, that's what we want to do. That's what a kid wants to do. How does a kid know he's supposed to use EIGH? Nobody's told him when you do that. You know? Why don't we just use an A? I agree with you, but you're wrong. You know, that would make sense, wouldn't it? But you're wrong. Okay? All right? That's why our kids struggle. A dyslexic kid has to build the neural pathways, which means they have to be given a why. You have to give it, and if you can give somebody a why, you can build a neural pathway. Yes?
I wanted to see if you could just recap our 3, if it's not these 3, it's not dyslexia. So it's an intelligent kid that's struggling
Thank you.
with language.
Thank you.
Number 2, they're a bad speller.
And number 3, somebody else in the family is dyslexic. This is genetic. The brain structure doesn't happen because you got a viral infection. Okay? It doesn't, I'm sorry?
How far removed? How far back?
Oh,
Is it a parent?
it's a parent. Yeah, you're going to get it from mom or dad, who got it from grandma or grandpa, and great-grandma and great-grandpa, and on up to the family tree. Okay? All right, this is genetic. You didn't get a concussion and change your brain structure. The brain structure you received came from mom or dad. Okay? Doesn't mean that we can always tell that mom or dad is dyslexic because they might be mildly dyslexic. But you know what else dyslexics do? Or what they don't do? They don't stand up and raise their hand and say, just want everybody to know that I struggle with reading and writing. They don't do that. Okay? It's the same kid who said, you know what? Please don't call me. Please don't call me. Please don't call me. You know? A dyslexic parent who is moderately dyslexic may not read too many books to their kids growing up. Or they might love telling their kids stories. It's kind of a workaround. Instead of reading you a book, I'm going to tell you a story. You know? Why? because they don't want their kid to see them struggling reading. I had a lady that sat at my desk, and we were with her student, and she's going, we've got all the pieces of the puzzle, and she's going, but we don't have anything genetic. We don't see anything anywhere. And then she called her mom and dad that week, and she said, Mom, Dad, we're learning that this is genetic, but we don't see it. And Dad goes, I've struggled with reading and writing my whole life. And she's like 38, and she's going, what? He goes, yeah. But she didn't know her own father struggled with reading and writing. Again, it's not something people are out there advertising, okay? You figure you get workarounds, and you learn to live life without it, or you learn to live life differently, okay? So this is genetic. We have to have an intelligent person who struggles with language generally, specifically a bad speller, and if this is genetic, it's got to be in the family. It's got to be in the family tree above me. We might not see it above me. What we do is we draw a circle, and in the center of the circle we put mom and dad and the kids. And then at the top of the circle we have both sets of grandparents. The sides of the circle we have both sets of aunts and uncles. And the bottom of the circle we have first cousins. And we say, is there anybody in that circle with similar struggles? Anybody? And struggles don't even have to be similar, but struggles with language, all right? We just look to see if it's somewhere in the family, okay? Quite often a kid will diagnose mom or dad, and that's what happened in our family. Our first son learned to read just like that. Okay, who was it that said that they had first son? Who was that? You, yes. First two kids learned to read just like that, okay? Third one came along, you're going, what in the world? Yeah, and it's surprising because, and this is not demeaning, but if we have a Downs child, we aren't surprised if they struggle, right? That doesn't shock us. Okay, we know that there's going to be difficulties. A dyslexic child will shock us. They'll surprise us. We don't have any warning that this is coming. They just look like a normal kid, okay? All right, Scott learned to read just like that. And in fact, you went around with your thumbs in your armpits saying, look what we did. No, we didn't do anything. This kid was pre-wired for it. We just didn't know it at the time, okay? Austin came along, and I don't care what you did, this kid wasn't going to learn to read. He couldn't memorize his alphabet, for goodness sakes, And it's funny, talking to him years later, Austin said, I thought Mom was doing something wrong. He's going, the 6-year-old little guy, 5-year-old little guy going, this woman's got issues, because if she didn't, I'd be reading by now, And he was right, actually. We had issues. We didn't know that it was dyslexia at the time, okay? So those 3 things have to be true. Intelligent child, struggling with language, bad speller, and genetic. After that, there's a host of secondary warning signs. They occur with directionality. They occur in areas with difficulties with sequence. They occur with difficulties with random memorization. If you have 3 secondary warning signs, if you got the 3 primary warning signs and you have the 3 secondary warning signs, the research says high likelihood of dyslexia, right there. Boom, high likelihood for dyslexia. But you know what? We never see 3 plus 3 ever. We see 3 plus 10. We see 3 plus 15. We see 3 plus 20. We see 3 plus 25. And what is that? That is not a reflection of severity of dyslexia. That is only a reflection of likelihood of dyslexia. The more warning signs we see, the higher the likelihood becomes, okay? A diagnosis, you can go to Children's Hospital, you can get a diagnosis, you can spend $3,000 if you want to do that, but that's basically what they'll take all day to do. They'll take all day and they'll do these type of tests, and they'll do testing on your child in these 4 different areas, and that's fine. A diagnosis is a fine thing. Some people need a diagnosis for peace of mind. Some people just need that, okay? And that's not a bad thing, all right? Yes?
So I was going to ask, if we see some of these warning signs in our kids, like some of us are going, okay, I think my kid might be dyslexic, what should we do?
Panic. No. No panicking. You know what? You people have something really valuable tonight. You have knowledge. Dyslexia is not a bad thing, all right? And that's super important to understand. In fact, dyslexia is a brilliant thing, and we'll get to what you should do, okay? If you take 100 Americans, 100 American business people, 100 successful American business people, 35 of them are dyslexic. Those are the numbers. They start off representing about 17 out of 100. They're over double represented among successful American business people. All right? That's after they've gone through the meat grinder. That's after 40% of them have dropped out of high school their junior year. That's after 70%, this is an estimate, of prison inmates are dyslexic. Okay? That's after you end up with maybe 9 kids left after the dropouts in school, and a small percentage of those then go on to college. And yet they still represent 35 out of 100 successful American business people. Okay? These people are problem solvers. These people are innovators. This is coming out of the right side of the brain. And not just that, it's coming out of the life that they live. A dyslexic person is solving problems from the day that they're born, a little bit early. They're solving problems early. Why? Because they are born into a society where most people are not dyslexic. They're born into a society that was not built for them. Okay? So every single day they have to figure out how to survive. All the way through school, they're figuring out how to survive. And you know what? It is with this innate intelligence and this built-in climate in which they have to problem solve 24/7, they do brilliant things. They do absolutely brilliant things. Steve Jobs, dyslexic. Do you know what? Steve Jobs made it through 1 semester of college. School was not his cup of tea. Made it through 1 semester of college. 7 years later, introduced the first Apple computer. Changed the world. Thomas Edison was dyslexic. Thomas Edison carried a note home to his mom one day that he couldn't read from his teacher. And he hands the note to his mom, and his mom reads the note to Thomas. And this is what she reads. Dear Mrs. Edison, Thomas is such a bright boy. So bright, in fact, that we really can't meet all of his needs here in school. We think it would be best if you kept him home and finished teaching him at home. That's a very nice note, but that's not what the note said. She read that because she didn't want to hurt Thomas's feelings. The note really said, Dear Mrs. Edison, your son is addled. Your son is stupid, and he's a waste of our time. You need to keep him home. Well, you know what? Thomas Edison, when he died, had over 1,000 patents. 1,000. If Thomas Edison patented for 40 years, he had to have a new patent every 2 weeks. That's insane. It's not really insane. That's crazy. He was brilliant. They changed the world. They see problems and they see solutions. And they're immensely successful after they've gone through the meat grinder, which also makes them stronger. The problem is a lot of dyslexic people, they get washed by the wayside. They fall through the cracks. And a lot of them, you know what, get trampled down so badly that they become criminals. And you know what? You know why? Because you got a bright little boy or a bright little girl, and you know what? They know that something's wrong. And nothing's really wrong, but the only place that a bright little boy or a bright little girl can go to when they're struggling is where? What's the only conclusion that a bright kid can go to in the 2nd grade when they're struggling? What's the conclusion that a 7-year-old will come to? I'm stupid. That's a conclusion that they come to. That's the only conclusion they can come to. I can't do it. Everybody else can do it. I'm stupid. You know, a kid who is really, really mentally impaired can't come to that conclusion. They don't know that they're struggling. Okay? A dyslexic kid does. And what happens to a dyslexic boy as they move through school? Year after year, red ink, red ink, red ink. 2 things. Either they become class clowns, because it's a distraction, or they become the class rebels. One of the 2. Okay? The class rebel, you know what he does? He says, I would rather get an F on my assignment because I didn't hand it in than because I looked stupid when I did hand it in. I talked to a 50-some-year-old guy, and he was remembering back to 3rd grade, 50 years old, and he's crying. And you know what? You know what his story was? His story was a math assignment in the 3rd grade. And he poured his heart into that math assignment. And he took it to the teacher so proud the next day, and he gave it to her, and you know what she did? She crumpled it up and threw it in the trash can and said that he was lazy. And you know, at 53 years old, he's crying about something that happened when he was 8. I know another guy who back in Ohio was put in this corner of the classroom by the teacher and made to wear a dunce cap. And you know what? This impacts people's lives dramatically. Just dramatically, yes.
So I have a question. I struggle with dyslexia, and so I want to get like better at like typing, and so like I looked up like different like typing and things like that, and so like just like faster, you know. And so it said like when I looked up like dyslexia and typing, it said like better to like learn it with like words that aren't actual words, just like by the sound. Would you suggest doing things like that, or would you suggest like actually typing and like typing actual words?
Your interest is in developing the skill.
Yes.
Okay.
And to get better at like spelling like that. I guess just overall, but I was just thinking, you know, like because I just think, what can I do to help myself with my dyslexia? So
Okay.
in my mind, I'm just like typing, you know. So like I can't like somebody teach me how to spell, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I could, but
Yeah.
you know, I was thinking that's something that I could like work on to get better. So
Okay, so typing, I would use nonsense words.
okay.
And the thing about nonsense words is that nonsense words usually follow real rules of the English language. Okay? So we have sight words, right? 20% of our language are sight words. That's crazy. 20%. So we have like 240,000 sight words in our language, words that do not follow the rules. We want things that do follow the rules. If you're wanting to learn to type, you use sight words because then you're not trying to figure weird stuff out. You're just focusing on developing the skill. If we're going to become better spellers as dyslexics, okay, that is not the wave of a magic wand. It just is not, okay? And let's finish up, and we'll go to this in about 2 seconds. This whole idea of diagnosing, again, it's this simple, okay? And this is not a diagnosis. Don't go tell people I'm diagnosing my son, okay? But if you have the 3 primary warning signs, and you look at this list and you have 3 secondary warning signs, you have an overwhelming likelihood for dyslexia. Overwhelming likelihood, okay? But you're probably not going to see only 3 secondary warning signs. You're probably going to see 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 secondary warning signs, okay? You've got an overwhelming likelihood for dyslexia. So we're going to answer this question about becoming a better speller with how do we work with a dyslexic student, okay? The English language is exceedingly challenging because what we just said, we've got 20% of our words are not nonsense, they might as well be nonsense, or sight words, okay? They aren't following the rules of the English language, okay? 80% do. The way a dyslexic person will master language is we must teach language the same way we teach mathematics. We must teach it logically, we must teach it sequentially, and we must teach it with excellent practice. We have to. Because what we're doing is we're building neural pathways. And that's the way a neural pathway is built. When you're learning mathematics, what do you do? Every night you go home with 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 problems that you do at home. Okay, when you're learning the piano, you go home from your piano lesson, and what you do is you set your metronome, and you set it like on... Why do you set it so slow? Because you don't want to miss. Why do I not want to miss when I'm playing the piano? Why do I not want to miss the note? Because when you miss, you build neural pathways just as much as when you're correct. And you know what? The more tributaries that I build, the more likely that I'm going to get off on something I shouldn't get off on. So if we go very slow and we make sure that we're excellent, that we're not missing, that we're doing things perfectly, then we can pick up the metronome that's the rate of the metronome. And we practice at that rate, and then we pick it up again, and we practice it at that rate. We're building neural pathways. The same is true in language, mathematics, anything that we do where we have to build neural pathways. Excellence is critical. With language, we're going to teach it the same way. And the thing that's really important to know is that you don't go into this thinking that this is a wave of a magic wand. It is not. It's easier than learning math, okay? You can learn math for the rest of your life. Learning math never ends, A person can become an excellent reader and writer in 2 to 3 years. And you can notice significant improvement in the first month. All right? But it's a 2 to 3 year process. Okay? Where we start with the 1 + 1 of language. And we introduce a concept and we practice it to mastery. And then we build on top of it. Okay? What is the 1 + 1 of language? You know what? Schools, actually most schools now, there's some belief that when we send our kid off to school, that there's already going to be some reading. That's kind of where schools are at today. There's an expectation that kindergartners are probably reading on some level already. Okay? Where do we normally start beginning to teach reading and writing? We normally start with, same place Julie Andrews started in Sound of Music, ABCs. It wasn't the ABCs, but it was the ABCs of music. But we start with the ABCs. We teach the alphabet, we start teaching associated sounds, we start blending, and we start working our way up the ladder. There's 2 preceding stages of language development. Okay? And research-based, if these 2 preceding stages of language development are not built, a person will forever be a struggling reader. We don't even begin teaching there. Okay, we have sound-symbol relationship. A says A, B says B. But below that, we have this thing called phonemic awareness, which is actually gaining traction today. It was never spoken of at all 20 years ago, at all. Phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness has nothing to do with symbols. Phonemic awareness is how do I process sound, right? Symbols are just representations of sound. What we're after is sound. And with phonemic awareness, it is simply, it's a dynamic skill. It's can I take series of sounds and can I manipulate them? Act says cat. I can move the T to the beginning and the C to the end. I'll use the letters instead of the sounds, but I can go t, ack, tack, act, act. Okay, I can remove letters, I can remove sounds and add sounds. This is all happening in my mind, not on paper. Okay, that's phonemic awareness. Many dyslexic kids, that is not existent. Or it's not fully existent. If they're struggling on that level, they're not going to be a good reader or writer. That has to be there. Very easily taught, but it needs to be taught nonetheless. Okay, it's like saying, well, go read this book, but I've never been taught my ABCs. You can't. You got to have the ABCs. The same is true here. You have to have phonemic awareness, okay, in order to become a good reader. There's a preceding stage of language development. It doesn't really have a name, but it involves 3 skills. And where phonemic awareness is dynamic, this is static. And it's simply, can I hear a sequence of sounds? And the sequence isn't going to change like it does with phonemic awareness. Can I repeat that sequence of sounds? Can I build that sequence of sounds with objects that are, what's the word that I want? Abstract. Not letters, but these objects are abstract. I can use pennies. I could use colored balloons. I could use whatever, counters, but they're abstract. And then can I resequence? Can I resequence what I just heard? Okay, it's a static process. Many kids struggle at this level. If that doesn't exist, I can't do a phonemic awareness. If phonemic awareness exists, I can't read and write. Not well. I might be able to on some level, but I will struggle. Okay? We begin at the very beginning. You know what? And what do? We teach every single level. We don't assume that a child has developed these skills. We check. And you teach this skill, and once it is mastered, you build on top of it. And when that skill is mastered, when these first 2 skills are mastered, then we begin sound-symbol relationship. And you know what? Most kids are going to have most of the symbols and sounds. Some kids are going to have all of them. Okay? But we still check. All right? Because if you've got a pebble in your shoe, you might be a 150-pound person, and you might be a great runner or something like that. But if you got a pebble in your shoe, that little pebble can throw off everything. So we check for those. And then we build on top of that. And we start with only single-syllable words, and we start with only the most fundamental sounds of the vowels. And we stick with the most fundamental sounds, the short sounds of the vowels, until those are mastered. And we teach a student why the vowels make those sounds. Vowels are the big sticking point. Vowels make all of these different sounds and in different circumstances. But you teach level by level, and you teach to mastery. You want to see a student saying, yes, I've got this, yes, I've got this, yes, I've got this, and then you move up the ladder. And you know what? And if we do that, we get excellent readers and writers. Okay? And it's just like mathematics. With every layer that we lay down, they're more sophisticated concepts, and we build on top of them. Silent E. I mean, my goodness, we just get finished telling a kid that E says E and N, whatever, and then we tell them, and here it doesn't say anything. Why doesn't it say anything? Silent E has all sorts of different purposes, more than just jumping over a consonant to make the previous vowel say its long sound. Okay? It has a lot of purposes, but you need to teach why it's doing this. And if we give kids reasons why, if we give the dyslexic kid a reason why, they'll get it with excellent practice, yes. Most non-dyslexic kids within months are really off to the races, most non-dyslexic kids, okay? It doesn't work for a dyslexic kid because we're missing this fourth piece of the puzzle. We talked about earlier, desire, an instructor, consistency, logical, sequential, okay? A dyslexic kid needs to be taught logically and sequentially. You go up to TCA, great school, super academic, college prep school, whatever. You know what they do? They just throw the phonemes in a kid's lap. Here's all the sounds for A. Here's all the sounds for CH. Here's all the sounds for, and they just give them to them. Boom. Here's a wheelbarrow. They're yours. That's okay for a non-dyslexic kid. They can get away with that. All right. The dyslexic kid can't. We have to tell them why A says A, and then we practice it. We have to tell them why A says ah, and then we practice it. So this is not an issue of intelligence. You all need to remember this. You, if you're dyslexic, you are an intelligent person. Probably spend a lot of your life thinking otherwise, but the reality is your population are world changers given the opportunity. You just are, okay? The stinky thing is you grow up in this meat grinder, and it's really hard on dyslexic people. But we need this logical sequential piece of the puzzle, and there are good curriculums that teach it this way. It's not easy, because even teaching the English language logically and sequentially, even teaching the rules of the English language, there's still lots of exceptions, okay? And that makes it tough. There's not exceptions to 1 + 1, okay? It's a hard and fast thing, okay? When you're teaching the English language, you get into this whole world of exceptions, and that makes it additionally challenging. But we can lay the foundation, and we can get things solidly in place with, yes, curriculums that are designed specifically for dyslexic kids, yes.
So if we have a kid in the school system, we think they're dyslexic, they're struggling, they're getting passed over, what can we do to advocate for them to be getting help that they need, or how can we help provide help that they need, or tutoring that they need?
Okay.
How can we help them?
Okay, so there are layers to helping a dyslexic child. Okay, if your kid is in the school system, your number one goal is accommodations. That's not the Holy Grail. That's not the end all. But accommodations, good accommodations, implemented well, can help your kid today. And we need help today. A dyslexic kid needs help today. Good remediation takes time. Okay? So we need help today. So number one is we need to get a 504 or an IEP for our kid. Okay? We need to get good accommodations. That's easier said than done. Schools are not just stepping up and saying, let me get your kid a 504. Let me get your kid an IEP. We would love to do that. They're not doing that. And I'm not blaming schools. They've got a lot of work. It's hard being a teacher, and it's hard running a school. You got lots of kids with lots of problems, lots of dynamics. And it's not just the education, it's family issues and emotional issues, and there's so much going on. It's like, wow, okay? But that's number one. What do you need to do to get a 504 or an IEP? What do you need to do to achieve that? You don't need to do as much as you think you have to do, okay? You do not need a diagnosis. Never let a school tell you, we need a diagnosis. Go get your kid diagnosed so we know what to do. Never let them tell you that, okay? They can't tell you that, okay? If a school demands a diagnosis, then you can say, oh, thank you so much. Where would you like us to take them, and how do you want me to pay? That's the school's responsibility. If they're going to require it, they need to pay for it. Okay? Diagnosis. You do not need a diagnosis. All you need to do is you need to show that my student struggles in specific areas consistently. Here's a paper trail. And if we saw this in kindergarten, we see this in first grade, we see this in second grade, We're consistently below benchmark in these areas. You just have to prove your case to them. Okay? And they'll have what they call a 504 review, where they sit down with you and they say, and a 504 is once you've got the 504 reviews, once you've got it. But you need to make your case. And you can ask for, anybody can ask for a 504, the word's gone, first appointment. When you meet with them and you want to say, I think my kid needs a 504, you have that right. All right? And the school cannot ask you for a diagnosis. You just have to prove your case. Okay? And it's an unfortunate thing. This is easier said than done, but that's where you start. Okay? The next thing you want to do is remediation. Okay? And that's actually teaching the kid how to read and write. And so this is where we need to know how to work with the school. And as parents, you must become mama bears and papa bears. Because here's a really, really sad thing. There's maybe teachers in here, and so I'm not here to offend teachers at all, on no level. But teachers, it's a career, right? And there's this formula that a teacher has, and when the formula is all put together, this is the day on which I can retire. Okay? And you know, it's a career. And it's a hard career. It's a challenging career. Okay, but you know what? I say this very gently, but the teaching, it's an industry, and they make money, and people are getting salaries, and they're retiring. And the really, really sad thing is they probably don't remember your kid 3 years from now or whatever, when your dyslexic kid has gone through their grade. You know, they're getting new crops of kids every single year, and they just don't remember. They don't have time to. So getting that IEP, that 504, it's not necessarily a cakewalk. Okay, and I would be lying to you. This is a difficult thing because the challenging thing in the school system is there is not a standard. So what they do in this school is not going to be what they do in this school. And within this school, what they do in this classroom will not be what they do in this classroom. It's going to be from teacher to teacher, from administrator to administrator. And I am sorry, I'm really very sorry, but it's an uphill battle every single semester, every single year. And that's just the reality of it. There's probably schools out there where that's not true, but by and large it is, yes.
Well, and I homeschooled my own kids up until like this year, but I have a daycare of school-age kids, and I had like 3 different parents who did 504 plans, and they say they were nightmares that followed them forever. They couldn't get into the schools they wanted because they're like, do your kid have any special whatever? And then the charter schools were like, well, we can't handle that.
Mm-hmm.
And they said trying to get rid of those plans were just a nightmare and a disaster, whether it was for behavior or learning or anything. And so, I mean, I think if there's a way to handle it outside of involving the school, I would probably just be like, rather than get my kid like labeled,
Yeah.
especially for something that a bunch of us have anyway.
Right, yeah.
You know?
And that's the reality of it, yes.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. I couldn't get not even a 504
Mhm.
IEP for my kids.
Yeah.
So that's why we ended up at a private school, because he was in 4th grade, struggling.
Yeah.
And they argued that he was super smart, that he didn't need an IEP.
He is super smart. Yeah.
That he has ADHD and he has all of these things, but according to them, he was super smart, he didn't need
Yeah.
404.
And that's what we're talking about. So many of our kids fall into that area where they will not get help, and they're good fighters, and they might and they look good enough to where the school says, no, we're not going to help. You got to be almost a disaster to get significant help. Okay, but that's anyhow. The only reason we suggest that is if you can get a good 504, if you can get a teacher who today will say, we're going to help you. You know what we're looking for is as quick help as we can get. Remediation takes a while. Okay, remediation is going to take 2 to 3 years, and this is work. Okay, because if your kid's in the school system, here's what they go through, and this is just the reality. The energy that they put into their day is 4 times what every other kid puts into their day. Because every class that they take is language-based. I don't care what they do, math, science, obviously history, literature, whatever class they're taking, it's language-based. And that's the hurdle. And so, man, they are exerting a lot of effort and a lot of energy all day long. And you know what? Our kids get to the end of the day and they are mentally exhausted. Mentally exhausted. But that's when we get remediation, is usually at the end of the day. Okay? Now, we have parents, and this is where I said is that this is where you all become mama bears and papa bears. You have to remember, and this is hard to do, that the school system is there for you. You are not there for the school system, but there's that propensity for the school system to begin to treat you like you're there for them. That's not true. The school system exists for you. You know that teacher? They're actually your employee. You pay taxes, and your taxes pay their salary. That administrator, he or she walks around dressed very nicely and sitting in the big office. They really work for you. They're your employee. They're there to educate your child. They're working for you. And this is where we as parents, we need the courage to say, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Administrator, Mr. or Mrs. Teacher, but this is what my child needs. You know what? You can opt out of standardized testing. You don't have to do that. That's for the school. Standardized testing does your child nothing. Okay? And we say, you know what? When you decide whether or not your child's going to participate in standardized testing, there's one way to make that decision. When my kid leaves the classroom after the standardized tests are completed, do they feel lower than the instep of a duck? You shouldn't be taking the standardized test. If that standardized testing makes my kid feel stupid, they shouldn't be doing it because it's not for them. It doesn't do anything for them. If my kid can come out of the standardized test, didn't affect me, it's water off a duck's back, I'm good, and they're happy and they've got a spring in their step and a sparkle in their eye, then it's okay because you know what? It does do the school some good. The schools need you to do that if possible. But the decision needs to be made. The decision, what I'm saying is, what you decide for your kids within the school system needs to be based on what is good for your kid. I'm not going to take the spelling test anymore. You know what? We spent hours every week doing that so I could get zeros. That's not a good use of my time. It makes my kid feel stupid. And you know what? We can do something different. What we do is with our curriculum when we teach kids is we say, well, you can tell your teacher, well, we're more than happy to take a spelling test, but we're going to provide the words. And our spelling test will be different than the spelling test all the other kids get. Okay? And here's the really fantastic thing. When we teach children properly, you can give them a list of words they've never seen before, and they'll be able to spell them. Okay? You can give them a list of words they've never seen before, and they'll be able to spell them. They don't have to practice them if they've been taught properly. Okay? That's really what we need to be doing in the schools. We need to be teaching kids the rules of the English language and why it works the way it does, not here's a list of random words, memorize them. Okay? But that's not what we do, unfortunately. Yes?
So if we're kind of doing that mama papa bear thing, what resources are out there that we can help fill in the gap for our students?
Okay, so again, there are multiple curriculums that can be used in teaching dyslexic children. Okay, and you know what? As parents, this is a tall order for you. It just is. This is not an easy thing. It's a sacrifice. And that's what it is. It is a sacrifice because it's going to take a lot more of your life than your parent peers whose children are not dyslexic. Okay, so strategies, we have parents who will actually go into the school during language arts and pull their kid out of language arts and work with them during that 40 or 45 minutes every day. That's a sacrifice. And you know what? And for some people, it's just not optional because I'm working then, you know. We can teach kids before school hours. We have parents who do that. It's when, you know, if you can get a kid when they're fresh, that's the best time to work with a kid, okay? Otherwise, we work with them after school hours, okay? Curriculum-wise, there's again maybe a dozen really, really good curriculums for dyslexic students, okay? Which teach our language very well for a dyslexic student, okay? We want to use one of those curriculums is what we want to do, all right?
There is a charter school, Orton Academy, that just started a couple years ago.
Yep, there's a couple of those. And that is it is kind of a second best, but it's better than the typical school. Okay, when you have a dyslexic student and you put them into a group of learners, here's the problem that we run into with a group of learners. With a group of learners, we're going to have dyslexic kids that run from mildly, moderately, severely, profoundly. Okay, and we're going to have a group of learners that are made up of these different children with different propensities, there are different places where dyslexia is concerned. Either some children are going to be waiting, or some children are going to be being rushed. Okay, not the best. Okay, it's better than nothing, but it's not the best. Okay, your child, International Dyslexia Association, here's their stance. If you can teach your child one-on-one, it is by far their best bet. By far their best bet. Okay? Now that is not a lifelong decision. That's not a school career-long decision. Okay? A dyslexic person can become an excellent reader and writer within 2 to 3 years. Okay? That can happen. But it's 2 to 3 years of real sacrifice in order to achieve that. It is. Yes. I'm going to finish her thought just a second. So there's actually Orton Academy, and there's another school called Allies. Okay, are the 2 schools in town that are providing specific instruction for dyslexic students. Okay, yes.
You mentioned like that they shouldn't really do standardized tests because it doesn't help them. And you talked about how if a parent can work up with them one-on-one, it's almost better than like throwing them into a class where the teachers are a little bit overwhelmed and don't have
Mm-hmm.
much time. What about like we live here in Colorado and we're required to do the standardized tests every other year starting in 3rd grade?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if they don't pass those and now you're forced to like go put your kid in this
I've never actually seen that happen. That on paper that can happen. On paper that can happen. I've not seen it happen. Okay. Again, doesn't mean it can't happen, but I've not seen it happen. And here's the irony of that whole thing: we have a school system where so many kids are failing; it's ridiculous. You know, and yet they're not held to the same standard, and it's just absurd. But I think the important thing with that is, if you can show that you are doing all of the right things and your student is still struggling, you're going to be okay. Okay? Because what the state wants to see is that you're making the investment. You've chosen to teach your child, okay? And you want to be careful with this. I've never seen this happen. I have worked with so many homeschool families, it's ridiculous, and I've never seen that happen. I worked with a family, the 15-year-old, 12 years old when we first met him, couldn't read at all, 0, homeschool family. Okay? Little sister, 10 years old, couldn't read at all, homeschool family. And there was all sorts of threats from social services. It didn't happen. Okay? Today, those kids can read, and they're doing well. But that was terrible, and it couldn't happen. But what you want to do when you're a homeschooler, you do want to cover your bases. And you want to document what you're doing. School year 22-23. Curriculum that we're using. And this is the time that we're spending daily. I have a dyslexic son. I have a dyslexic daughter. We've chosen this curriculum. Okay? And here's what we're doing on a daily basis. And you've got a paper trail. You're documented, you know, that we are being faithful. And if you're being faithful, you're going to be okay.
So in that case, it would be good technically to have a diagnosis if you're homeschooling, so you can show that along with the paper trail.
Yeah, but again, you don't need a diagnosis, okay? You do not need that, okay? And so diagnoses are expensive, and so you're going to spend $3,000 for one. But we could, yeah, you don't need that.
Well,
Go.
we also, in Colorado, as homeschoolers, you can, standardized testing is one thing that's required, or an evaluation. And so if you have,
Good.
like I do for my dyslexic kids, we do the evaluation. Here's a sampling of their work, here's and they're evaluated, and that takes the place of the standardized test, and so my kids just wouldn't be able to do it. And so we've chosen the evaluation route, and that's totally still under the law, no issues at all.
So you can have a licensed teacher do that evaluation.